Hello, everybody. We are back. This is My New York Company with Yuri Dashevsky, and our guest is Lieutenant Colonel David Richardson, U.S. Marine veteran, an artist, and a writer. And we had to break our stream. Now we are back, and we're going to talk about why wars altogether. Why do they begin? Because that's a puzzling piece for all of us. The missing puzzle in this Putin adventure that he started with Ukraine, so bloody, so destructive. Why would he go to war? Eventually, we'll get to that point. But please go on, David.
So, look, I mean, there was a gentleman named Blaney, and I can't remember his first name, but he wrote a book called The Cause of Warfare, and he did an in-depth study over the last, I think it was three or 400 years, and the conclusion he came to is countries go to war when they have differences, and we'll get into the differences in a minute, but really they go to war when there's a dispute over the balance of power. So in other words, there's a perception that the power is balanced enough, and the way the dispute is resolved is through warfare, and that's exactly what's going on now with the Russians and the Ukrainians, but it's really the Russians against the West, and Ukraine is the background. And Blaney identified, 6 or 7 factors that play into that. And the first one he talks about is what a country's relative military strength is and the ability to apply that strength in a theater of war. So in the case of the Russians, I mean, they did the balance of power, and they are no longer the Russian army of the Soviet Union, which was dilapidated, to say the least. They demonstrated their army in, I think it was 2008 in Georgia to pretty great effect. And then again in Ukraine in 2014. And I don't think there was so much in the Crimea, but they've demonstrated before, and they've demonstrated that it is effective and likely more effective than the Soviet army was. So, whatever you think about the Russian army, according to Mr. Putin, it was at least on par with the Ukrainian army, and that's one of the factors. So essentially, he decided that in the balance of military power, he was at least as strong as Ukraine, and he didn't really have to worry about the West so much anyway, and I'll get to that in a second. Because the other factor that Blaney identifies is the prediction of how outside nations are going to act when there is a war. So in the case of the Russians, when they attacked the Ukrainians, I don't think they were very worried about other countries getting involved. I'm talking about boots on the ground, not so much supplying arms and ammunition, because that is a factor. And the longer the war goes on, the more that will have an effect on the Ukrainians and the Russian army. So he gambled, and it looks like so far was correct that there weren't other nations that were going to get involved actually in combat on the ground. Now, that doesn't mean they don't oppose what he's doing, because there's economic factors, or there's economic sanctions, there's the flow of weapons into Ukraine, and the longer, like I said, the longer the war goes on, the more that will have an effect. The third thing that the Russians likely calculated was the unity of the Russians relative to the unity of not just Ukraine, but the West. So regarding the Russians, I don't really know the internal politics of Russia, but definitely the Russians decided that there were factions within Ukraine, particularly in the Donbass, that they could take advantage of when they went into Ukraine, because there are divisions in Ukraine amongst, quote, Ukrainians. And I think when the Russians went in, they also considered the divisions of the within the Western powers in general. I think they gambled that the U.S., which is somewhat war weary, particularly after the ignominious withdrawal from Afghanistan, uh, they were probably out of a little bit out of sync as far as uh, not with NATO, but with the willingness to go to war on the ground in Ukraine. But about the division piece, I think they likely made the correct assumption that if the U.S. wasn't going to lead a NATO force into Ukraine, then nobody was. So this ends up being somewhat of a war by proxy. The West um, fighting the Russians via the Ukrainians. That's kind of how it's shaking out. Um, Another
What
thing
do
I
we
think.
have against the Russians? What's the problem there? It turned out, the biggest panic in Russia nowadays after sanctions hit them, some guy chained himself like in American style. He chained himself to a McDonald's and said, I cannot allow this disappear from my life. And the car industry disappeared because everything was Korean, South Korean, and Chevy and something else. The Italian, I guess, it was a long story. Was the Fiat factory built in Soviet times in Russia? But basically, people looked around after 20 years, 22 years of Putin's rule. Nothing is there. Nothing, no money. This famous rich man who was arrested, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, he was arrested by Putin. He spent I don't know 15 years in jail, and he posted recently on Facebook. He said, "Here's a pack of paper, 500 sheets, a ream of paper, right?" And it cost so much. I don't remember the price in rubles, but every sheet of this paper costs more as a result than if it were more than a ruble. You
Well,
destroyed the currency, and life is will be as Russians used to like it. It won't be back like this in the next 30 to 100 years. They predict.
yeah, I don't think it's the West so much that has anything against the Russians. I think the Russians it has specifically to do with Ukraine and Ukraine joining NATO. I think that is the issue. And I mean they've stated that. I think it was the Minsk Accords in 2014 that essentially there was a deal made where the Donbass would either become independent or be part of Russia. I can't remember the exact thing, but the Ukrainians, I don't know how long they've been trying to join NATO, but that's the real issue because obviously the Russians they don't want NATO on the border with Russia. They want the buffer zone there. So I think that's the issue the Russians have with the West, and then specifically Ukraine.
Yeah,
So
but
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I know. I'm waiting for you.
No, I'm saying that with respect, Putin can claim one thing on television today from Russia, saying that look how NATO is weak. NATO
Right.
can't do anything. They get them something. Obama gave them blankets and night vision goggles, which are very important too. But night vision goggles. But in absence of any other weapons, it's useless. You can just spend time under this blanket and wearing night goggles. But in fact, NATO is so weak, and why to move? Why move towards NATO by conquering the buffering country? Isn't it better to have it as an ally and talk to them and give them something? Like in this world, we use commerce, we use capitalism, and Russia is huge on capitalism, as they say, as they think they're huge. They're a capitalist country. So buy Ukraine, help Ukraine. It's an interesting turn. I spoke with my previous guests about it. He was in Kiev for a long time, and everybody's puzzled by this very simple fact that there is a pipeline going across Ukraine to Europe carrying natural gas, LNG, right? liquefied natural gas. Taking it from Russia, Russia makes money off of it. Nothing happens to this pipeline. Nothing. The cities are razed to the ground. The airplanes are down. The tanks are burned, and naval, those boats, ships, whatever, destroyed. But the gas goes through this pipeline like nothing's going on.
Oh, what you
What
tell
could
me?
be the answer?
Oh, that the gas
Across
is still.
Ukraine, yeah, across Ukraine.
Yeah, well, that's because Western Europe needs that gas. Um, uh, I don't think it's. I still think it's the fact that the Russians perceive Ukraine as a buffer between the West and the NATO forces. I know he said that the NATO forces are weak. That's his perception, and as we speak, I don't believe there are any NATO forces on the ground in Ukraine, and I believe that's his perception of the weakness, that they would not commit ground troops to Ukraine. So the fact that the oil or the natural gas is still flowing through the pipeline, I don't necessarily think that's an issue. It's still flowing into Western Europe.
Yeah, Germany.
Yeah, specifically Germany, and I think the U.S. is still importing oil from Russia, aren't we? I do believe we are. Yeah. So, look, the commerce is still going on, even though there's a war that's raging. So I don't think it's specifically about energy, either gas or natural gas. I think it's about the Donbass and the fact that the Ukraine is trying to join NATO, and Russia sees that as a threat. Because remember, the Ukraine is kind of the highway to Russia. You can't go through. It's hard to get through Belarus because of the marshes and the swamps north of Ukraine. But it's much easier to travel through Ukraine. So that's specifically, as I understand it, Russia's beef with NATO, the West in general, and Ukraine. Am I wrong on that?
I have it compartmentalized in my brain. And I think about it very hard twice a day for almost an hour each time. So it makes 2 hours a day thinking about this matter. And I have a picture that includes the weakness of current administration in Washington, D.C. And Putin looked at his counterpart of the big, scary American wolf, and he thought it's now or never. Because with Donald Trump, it would be, as everybody says, and I would love to know your point of view. And a lot of people say it would never happen under Donald Trump if he were president. What do you think of it?
Well, you're exactly right. He did think it was now or never, and I'll get to Trump in a second, because the other three factors are the memory and the realities of war. So for the memories and the reality of war for the U.S., it's very fresh. We just had a withdrawal, ignominious, as I refer to it, withdrawal from Afghanistan. The state of our economy, for many reasons, is not good right now. Inflation is, I think, it's highest it's been since the 1970s. I can barely remember the 1970s, but I do remember the issue of inflation. It's worse than it's ever been. And then I think he looked at the presidency. And look, you can't really know. People have a tendency to say, they always called Trump crazy. And now people say that, President Biden is in cognitive decline. But I do think he thought it was now or never because of those factors. So his military strength was relatively equal, at least to the Ukrainians. He didn't think NATO would intervene on the ground without the leadership of America. He knows America is war weary and we displayed it in our withdrawal from Afghanistan. Our economy is in pretty bad shape, actually, due to primarily inflation and unemployment. And then the final thing was
self-inflicted 101%.
Oh, I believe so. I'm not going to give
what
COVID. I think it's actually. I will tell you. I think it's the default of federal and state bureaucrats and overreaction to COVID is why we're in this situation. But I think you look personally at President Biden and did not think that he was a formidable foe. Now, as far as Trump goes, I would say that President Trump was purposely unpredictable. You didn't know what he was going to do.
Of course.
That is an enemy that you fear. A predictable enemy is a much easier enemy to battle than an unpredictable enemy. So I do think, I mean, I think you couldn't have said it better, because I think actually what I said in my article, not that I said it the best, is that the Russians decided that because of the factors that I kind of outlined, that February 2022, if ever, was the time to attack, and they attacked. So we're going to have to see how it plays out. Once again, I don't think the casualties are what they're being displayed. Each side has their own version. What I do see going on the ground, though, is to some degree a steady Russian progress or consolidation. So I'll pause there, and then we can chat about what we think is going to happen in the end.
Yeah, what nobody knows, of course, it would be yesterday they announced, or last night they announced, and the night before yesterday, they announced that the phase one is accomplished. Some General Rudskoy announced that as we planned this war, the phase one is accomplished, and we take Donbass. Donbass, what they had on the February 23rd. Before the war began, basically, they were running this area, and the least acceptable, but still acceptable version for them would be to create a corridor between Odessa along the coast of Black Sea, and then call it a day. Say, okay, next stage. And now they're in a situation where they put themselves in this, and this is Russian way of thinking. That's why I think that dialogues like this have certain meaning, because as they announced that they finished with the phase one, and everybody kind of mentally applauded to this and said, okay, that's at least something towards peace, and they immediately bombed and sent missiles to Lvov, to the part where President Biden was actually very close to the border with Poland, where Joe Biden used to be at that time. So at the same time, they stepped towards peace with one leg and with one foot, and the other foot stepped on somebody's toe. So that's typically Russian Putin tactics. And to me, also the situation, and I kind of phrased it several times in Russian, and I want to run it by you in English, because maybe because you got to disprove me if I'm wrong, and wouldn't be the first time I was wrong. But the thinking is also that the interest in Ukraine specifically, they have a few points in common, Putin and Biden. Putin's point is he set up a perfect scam out of Russia with its 150 million people. And it's even a place where locals sometimes they migrate from former Soviet republics, like from Uzbekistan or Central Asian, where life is even worse than in Russia. So they come, they serve as janitors, as street sweepers in Moscow, St. Petersburg, etc. So the rich are getting richer, like to do the ВЖИВУЮ, and the poor people, they have a chance to go to Brooklyn and work as waiters and clean the Walmarts at night. If they have no way to make a living in Russia. So it's a perfect scam for him. And Ukraine is a bad example, a bad neighbor who doesn't want anything from Russia. Of course, there is some corruption. There are some oligarchs who suck off this pipe. They make a couple of bucks here and there. They're no poorer than Russian oligarchs. It's just less of them, a little bit. At the same time, Ukraine is the place where they elect presidents. Can you believe it? they have number of presidents during Putin's 20 years in power. They had this. They had their constitution. They have people running around with flags. They want to join European Union. At first, they wanted to join European Union. NATO came later, a little bit to their minds. So that was this thing that pisses off Putin. I can't imagine how pissed he is because there's no other things on his mind. He has his own things running in Central Africa, and he's trying to compete with China and to be friends with China and sell parts of Siberia to the Chinese. So that's his thing. And of course, name of Biden family is connected with Ukraine. And there's the laptop, and there is Burisma, and there's Hunter, and there is the wife, the widow of a Moscow mayor who gave Hunter $3.5 million. And you as an artist should be interested in the artwork that he's producing as well. That very expensive artwork was sold to anonymous buyers. So this whole thing, there's so many skeletons in the closets in this Ukrainian Chernozem, this black soil, so fertile for Biden family. So he had some interest, I think, to kind of iron out those things, just to destroy them, to get rid of this administration that has anything to do with the remnants, or even maybe the whole deal is somewhere in a big file, in a box, sitting in a safe place in Ukraine. Just get those people out. And the tell for me was when he offered to send some device to offer Zelensky an escape from Kiev when Russians started to go in. So they thought that Putin said to Xi, he said, I mean, I'm kind of fantasizing here. He said to Xi, watch me. I'll be that boy that you send out first to start the fight, and then big guys come in, but I will do it like perfect. It will be, you'll watch me. In 2 days, I'll take Kiev. And that was something of 3 days or 5 days. And Biden said, okay, we'll limit an incursion, okay, starting now. No, on the 18th, on the 16th. And nothing came out of it. Biden said, I'm sending you the transportation to Zelensky and his family, etc., to take him out to create a government in exile. And Zelensky said no. And it turned out that Russia cannot do it in 34 days now already. So that was, and Putin proceeded. He broke kind of this agreement with Biden that America wouldn't interfere; they would let him do it, and that's my hunch. That's my theory that it was. And then in panic, they set those sanctions that they say make little sense, but it turns out they make huge sense for Russia, and it's very hard to restore it, especially in a way that the investors would be scared away. It took so much time for Russia to build this climate for investors to come in, and now it's almost impossible. So this something that to me it's kind of shows some American involvement into this. I mean, American people has nothing to do with that. It's the corrupt part of our government that we allowed to fester for so long, and that's how that's how they rolled with Putin, and now Putin kind of has an upper hand in this situation. And we know Turkey is giving lethal weapons, those Bayraktars, to Ukrainians, and we cannot agree on MiG-29, which is 40 years old.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous. The NATO member Turkey does the same thing, and the other members just cannot do it. I'm sorry, it was just a little bit disjointed, I think, but whatever, whatever
that's
made
okay.
sense.
Look, I'm going to make. I have. This is somewhat of a cheap shot, but I have to comment on Hunter Biden's paintings. Anybody who's buying them is buying influence. They're kind of the paintings that you do in therapy sessions, and he's able to sell them.
Which most of his life is, by the way.
Right. It's like when you go to art therapy and they say you've got problems, you should sit down and work them out on canvas. That's what he's kind of done. Now, to some degree, all artists are doing that, by the way, and I'm the first to say that we're all working out our problems on canvas. But I'm not in a therapy session. So anybody who's buying them is buying them to buy influence. As far as Zelensky goes, look, I think there's something that came in, and I'll get to why Putin would want him gone. I think there was an unexpected thing that come out of this, and we'll get to the outcome.
Mhm.
Is when Putin weighed, I've got it written down here, the personalities and experience of both sides of the leaders, and he took a look at Biden essentially because he's the leader of the West. He decided that for whatever reason that he wasn't up to the task of supporting Ukraine either on the ground or in any other way in the war, and we're yet to we don't know how that's going to play out. And he viewed himself as the stronger power. What I don't think he anticipated is that Zelensky would become a folk hero as he has. And he's kind of become a hero of the war. And by the way, I wrote a novel called War Story. And the question that's answered in the novel is, why is man fascinated with war? And one of the answer I give essentially because courage lends dignity to the dung heap that is war, and Zelensky has displayed a degree of courage and become a folk hero because of it. And I don't think the Russians, specifically Putin, anticipated that. Now, as far as Zelensky in power, I don't know the details of how he was offered to get out. I do know he said what it was. I don't need a ride. I need weapons, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
You couldn't get better than that. I got to hand it to him. I don't need a ride. I need weapons. And then he said, to be or not to be, and I shall be. Or we shall be. So I don't think really they anticipated that. Now, I do think it's in specifically Putin's best interest to have somebody that he's very friendly with inside the Ukraine, because once again, this war is about the Ukrainians trying to join NATO and NATO weapons, or at least potentially NATO forces being on the Russian border. So I think that's what it gets down to. How does it play out? Well, I mean, Russians are fighting time right now. I guess both sides are fighting time because the longer that the Russians stay in the Ukraine, the more vulnerable they are to the influx of better weapons. Hopefully not 40-year-old MiGs, but better weapons. And they will be used effectively against Russian forces. The sooner he sits down with Zelensky and gets Zelensky to agree not to join NATO, to agree that the Donbass, the province in the Donbass, essentially either are independent or somehow Russian protectorates. And I think there's some nationalist groups in Ukraine that Putin would like to see gone, or the Russians would like to see gone. So I think those are really the three factors he's looking for. And there's been a lot of talk about Zelensky and Putin speaking with each other. So I'll leave it at that, and field your questions there on how we get to that end state. And by the way, if he gets that end state, essentially the Russians win with those three factors. Back to you.
Thanks for your insight, David. And I wanted to ask you about military traditions in the United States. We hear the stories of continuing traditions in the families, and just people who are think that there is a popular kind of thing going around that only poor families send their kids because they have no other way to advance in life. They send them the kids don't join the military, and I know firsthand from meeting people in New York that the people come to New York from all over the country. And I was in Katz's Delicatessen at the time, where it's like one of the centers where you meet people, like the juggler. If you will, military tradition: send the salami to your boy in the army that they started during World War II, and other beautiful things. And I saw people that came from programmers, and they said everybody served in my family, and my grandfather he fought, my father fought, and so why wouldn't I kind of stay away from that? And in the line of this tradition these days, there is a name of I don't remember the rank, James Gomez. He's on Twitter, and he's a guy from Connecticut. a veteran. He retired. He worked in construction in New York. Then he started his company in Connecticut, something also having to do with the construction. And when he heard about Ukraine, he has nothing to do with Ukraine. He has 4 kids here, and the last name is Gomez, and the wife is not Ukrainian. So he went there to fight, and he posts on Twitter. And today or yesterday, he posted that they burned 7 tanks, and they formed like a group, like English-speaking soldiers coming from England, from Great Britain, from France. Obviously, they have big tradition of for how they call it. Forgot the name. The traditional organization there. It goes the veterans. So they go fight there. And what's your opinion of this? Is it like a the right thing to do, because he's definitely a hero for Ukrainians, and he's a good soldier, obviously, American soldier, setting good example. He said, I came there with my backpack, with my, I don't know if he had armored the bulletproof vest
Right.
or anything. Yeah, he had the helmet, and he said, I picked up a Kalashnikov on the battlefield, and I just went to fight. That was it. And then now he has I think, M16 or some such. So back to his favorite, the weapon of choice, obviously. So what do you think? What's this tradition? How American soldiers' role, American officers' role in situations of uh, um, today's events in Europe?
Well, so I think the historical equivalent here is probably the Spanish Civil War. I can't remember the exact dates of it. And, Robert Motherwell painted a whole series of paintings, Elegy to the Spanish Republic, which fell during the Spanish Civil War. And there was a lot of Americans, British, and other English-speaking
You're talking
folks.
about Ernest Hemingway and the like, right? The 30s, 1936.
Right. It was in the 1930s. I don't remember the exact dates, like
Mhm.
32. But yes, Franco and
Mhm.
Ernest Hemingway. I think there's some of that going on here. Look, and I don't have any problem with anybody going to fight. I mean, uh, when I joined the Marine Corps, I had the basic skills of a Marine. I could find my way through the woods at night. I was an expert shot with a rifle, and I could swim very well. Which brings me to the type of people that join the military. Look, when I was teaching at the George Washington University, I rejected most of the people that tried to become officers. They simply didn't have the physical or the mental qualities to do it. I just named 3 of them. You have to be a good shot with a rifle, which the Marine Corps will teach you. You have to be able to swim, which the Marine Corps will teach you, and find your way through the woods at night, and then you can pretty much do everything else. But just those 3 things require quite a bit of physical adeptness, or a physical prowess, and mental adeptness. So for the most part, I rejected most of the officer candidates. If you looked at something specifically like Marine infantry, what you find is most of the enlisted men are double volunteers. Now, I don't know that they volunteer to join the Marine Corps, but they specifically want to be infantrymen. In other words, frontline troops. Most of those Marines that leave the service use the GI Bill. I don't know if most of them, but a large number of them
Mhm.
use the GI Bill and go to school and do very well. They could have gone to college right off the bat, but they didn't want to. They wanted to join something like the Marine Corps so they could be part of it, whether in wartime or not. So I think there's a big misperception about who joins the service in the military or in America. It's not just poor people that don't have anything else to do. But back to the Ukrainian situation, I think we'll see more of that the longer the war goes on. More influx of foreign fighters, and specifically folks from the United States, possibly Britain, Australia. Look, you saw that in when there was the caliphate. You saw people leaving Britain and America and going to fight for the caliphate. So it's a cause, and
Mhm.
people are drawn to causes because causes give you purpose. And by the way, that's not a bad thing. People kind of chuckle at that, but there's myth that surrounds that, and we live by myth anyway. So that's my answer.
Yeah, not everybody cannot be like this phone picking, person standing on the corner thinking with about things that have nothing to do with the situation. Like, I'm talking about the urban life. People have different aspirations, and
Right.
people have different criteria of worthiness, of self-worth, I would say. Some think the more money they make, the more they worth. Something that look at the accomplishments and they compare themselves with the past. And as an artist, and by the way, while we're at it, I wanted to put on screen the book of yours. I have it here prepared, and this is the cover of the War Story, a novel by David Richardson, foreword by Douglas Deschert, and this Douglas is someone who introduced us to each other. So this book
Right.
is available on Amazon. What's on the cover? What's this figure here?
So that figure is a replica of a figure that I used to see when I left the government center in Ramadi in 2006. And what it was, it was a sign outside of a gym. There
Hmm.
were no weights or stationary bikes or anything left in the gym. It was all gone. And when I first saw that sign of a man heaving a barbell
Hmm.
over his head, it was essentially whole. Um, 2 months later, kind of what you see on the cover of War Story was what it had become from random gunfire. A month after that, there was really not much left of that sign over the gym. Most of it had been um, uh, torn away, shot away, blasted away by random gunfire. And by the way, that's the same with Ramadi. Ramadi slowly disintegrated over a period of a couple of years. And so I put that sign of the weightlifter.
Hmm.
I painted that, and then I shot it with a shotgun to replicate the random gunfire in Ramadi, and I put it on the front of my book. So that's why it's all shot up because I shot it, like I said, so I could replicate it, and then I put it on the front of the novel. I thought it was a fitting cover, by the way.
Yeah. What's the prevailing feeling, memory of yours towards your experience in the battlefield? Is it something of doing something worthy, or there's a show in the movies you have nothing but regrets?
I have a specific saying that I use with that, and when President Obama pulled us out of Iraq, I was a little disappointed. I said, "Well, President Obama might have lost his war, but I won mine." I don't know how that's held up over the years, but I captured my experience in War Story, and I have no regrets about what I did whatsoever. Um, I took 11 men into combat, and I brought 11 of them home. We trained and fought alongside the Iraqis. I was friends with the Iraqis. We respected each other. I don't know where Colonel Abdul Majid, the other protagonist in War Story, is today. I would love to find Majid and sit down with him and drink tea and he smokes cigarettes and I smoke cigars. I would love to smoke with him again. I really enjoyed that, and that's all kind of outlined, or not outlined, but it's detailed in War Story. The story is as much about Colonel Abdul Majid as it is about Major Clay Steerforth. And the arc of the story kind of goes from Washington, D.C. to North Carolina, where Camp Lejeune is, and then over to Iraq, and then back to Washington, D.C. It's essentially an Odyssey or a Golden Fleece story. But two of the unique things about it is it's as much about art as it is war. And it also tells the war from the Iraqi perspective. And as Colonel Majid told me about his time in Iraq since the first Gulf War, then on through the sanctions, then fighting the Americans again in 2003, and then it details our friendship. And it's kind of a testament how professional soldiers kind of get along with each other. And by the way, that's one of the reasons I don't think the Russians are as bad as everybody's saying about them, because they're professional soldiers, and I think they're fighting. The same with the Ukrainians. Many of them are professional soldiers. There is some bond there between professional soldiers, regardless of the nationality. It's odd because Colonel Majid and I would have been shooting at each other 2 years earlier, but we became fast friends. So that's my pitch on War Story.
Amazing. It's a great pitch, and I'm sure it's a great story, and it's a great book. And I would encourage everybody to just go and look it up on Amazon and buy it if you feel like reading something in English. Because, as I said, this is mostly for Russian American listeners.
Right.
But we recommend books, and we had Rebecca Koffler the other day, who wrote a book, Putin's Playbook. And a lot of people who came to listen to watch the program, they said that they already read the book
Oh, wow.
that she wrote. Yeah, it was like Putin sells. Putin sells. But let me ask you: you think a lot about the role of war in human history, right? That's your kind of specialty and forte. And how does it jibe with role of art in human history? To me, it's very special. So,
You look, number one, I don't think war is our natural state. Our natural state is something else. It's not war. It might be pushing and shoving, but it's not killing. Because if you go back to hunter gatherers, when we were essentially bands of 40 people kind of trotting around the world, when we ran into each other, we chose to move away from each other to greener pastures, because you wouldn't sacrifice your probably one of your two or three children. So I don't think war is actually our natural state. I think art actually is our natural state, because we can go back and we find artifacts where we are expressing ourselves. I think we've gone back as far as 40,000 years now. Warfare is a function of what I would call the state. And when we settled down, we don't know whether wheat settled us or we domesticated wheat or wheat domesticated us. But when we did that, we eventually became nation states. And it's the state that makes war. I mean, some tribes do, but it's the state that primarily makes war. And I don't think it's the natural state of man. I think actually art is more of the natural state. So I'm not sure if the answer is it specifically, but in general, I think you get what I mean.
what's your favorite piece of art?
It's the Modigliani's nudes. Actually, I'm sure your listeners know who Modigliani is.
Yeah, of course. A famous poet, Anna Akhmatova, was his lover, and
Mm-hmm.
he made a number of portraits of images of her. And he's like a favorite artist. I love. I travel for artwork to see the art of the past, and I love the cave art. To me, the older it is, the better. I
Right.
haven't been to Lascaux and other caves where they're famous for. I've been to some places in France though, and they're full of replicas because the originals they fall apart once they unseal the cave. Once they discover the cave,
That's
they
bad.
learn to create the replicas right next to it, and trust me, you can tell the difference. You can
Right.
tell.
I don't know if you know this, but we painted horses for centuries, and suddenly we realized we had the gait wrong, the gallop.
Uh huh.
But they, but
Okay.
the hunter gatherers, when they show horses and bison running, they actually have the gait correct.
Yeah,
And
I'm
we only
absolutely fascinated by the fact that someone who painted those animals in Lascaux caves in France, if you think about the process, there's very little room inside. You cannot have the object in front of you. You have to do it from your memory. There is no
right,
electricity. No. Someone is holding the torch. Somebody's holding the paint for you. Somebody's holding the torch to light up the wall on which you're going to work. So it's a big production in today's language, and all those people, instead of waking up and think, what I'm gonna eat in next 5 minutes, or I gotta go and get those berries, those friggin', antelopes or whatever. they go to the cave and they work there, and it shows that somebody else had to feed them.
Right. Yuval Harari, in his book *Sapiens*, points out that they were probably not as primitive as we think. Uh, they had language and that type of thing, and look, they were fully human. So their emotions were likely not that much different than ours are. And like I said, I think they put more effort into art than they did warfare. That's my hunch. And there's people on both sides of that argument.
They had to be more intelligent because they could not, rely on other people's intelligence. So just to
Harari
think
point
about
too,
it.
that we've probably become dumber. Just because you had to be so much more aware. I mean, think about when they were replicating the gait of the bison. That means they focused on that and they watched that. So yeah, that's
Observed. I my favorite example. I want to talk about art a little bit more than war. One of my favorite examples in the city of Poitiers in France, they have a university and they're pretty famous. It's like one of the centers that study Magdalene culture, the old European Magdalenian culture that produced. They say those people actually were first who came to America. Of course, it's like a apocryphic, so to speak. So, but some people in Canada believe it. When there was the Ice Age, they walked along the edge of the ice that sees the top part of Atlantic Ocean, and they fed off the seals and fish they could get with the harpoons, etc. So they walked as close as to like 150 or 50 miles from the coast of Virginia, because they found some arrow tips, etc. So there in this museum in the Poitiers University, they have a whole room filled with flat stones, and they have scratches on it. And you look at them, and there are many layers of those scratches. And the guy who was explaining there things to us, he said that we think it was a school. It was a school. They were training people to become sculpture makers. It was those sculptures were omnipresent, like Venus of Willendorf and such. So
right.
people would just what we know about the cave life of the cavemen and Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons. It's very, very different from what the books tell us, and the more the merrier. The more you know about it, the more fascinating it becomes to you, because it's wholly different picture of human evolution, mentally, intellectually. Thought, it's just such a food for thought. It's to me, I became addicted to travels.
It's almost as if the more we dig, the more we figure out that we really don't know very much about the past. It kind of widens the aperture, for what actually happened. I first read about the domestication of the dog in one of Arnold Toynbee's books, and I think at the time we thought that we had domesticated the dog, probably 6,000 or 8,000 years ago, but now we actually think it's 45 or 50,000 years ago that the dog was domesticated. And why do we only have certain animals that are domesticated? Why do we have cave art, or why do we have all those at all? But I'm sure that there were some type of training and that type of thing that took place to create those objects, because they're complicated. Just think about the bisons running and they get the gait right. It's very complicated.
Yeah, very, very observant, and it makes you humble. Humility is one of the things that today's culture is missing big time. We could benefit a lot from having more humility in front of the millennia that are behind our race. David, thank you so very much for this conversation, and I hope I was not very muddled in my meditations on the matters that I know so little about. Just again, this old caveman observations. regarding the American politics and international situations, and between praying for world peace and praying for victory in just wars, I don't know which one to choose.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me, and I look forward to coming on again.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Thank you, friends.
Thank you.
Спасибо, друзья. И напоминаю вам всем, Дэвид, thanks. Я хочу вам напомнить всем по поводу нашего фандрейзера еще раз. Мы помним о том, что мы собираем деньги на Украину, и мы посылаем их туда. И, в общем, эту историю уже многие знают. Это наш Cats is Delicatessen плакат. $100 по Зелле дают вам этот плакат, если вы присылаете заявку и адрес, на который нужно выслать этот плакат. И деньги эти скорейшим образом доставляются для того, чтобы приобрести то, что нужно сегодня Украине, и, наверное, нужно будет завтра, к сожалению. Все, всем доброго, до свидания, дорогие друзья, и до встречи завтра.
Yeah.